Hi, this is Sydney from Peters Township Public Library. In early August of 2025, we did an in person or a hybrid program where we shared information about art heists throughout history. So, this is just a recording of the information that we presented that evening. So, we're going to look at several works of art, some larger thefts, or perplexing puzzles within art history focused on heists. So the first piece we're going to look at is the Ghent altarpiece by Jan van Eyck in 1432. It's been stolen by Napoleon, Hitler, and many more. So it's called the Ghent altarpiece. And it is an oil painting on panels. So there's 24 panels altogether, 12 that we see right now. They're the forward facing panels when it's open, and then 12 more whenever the altarpiece is closed. We know that it was completed in 1432, but we don't know when it was started. There is an inscription on silver strips mounted in the rear of the donor panels that read, "The painter Hubert van Eyck, than whom none was greater, began this work. Jan, his brother, second in art, completed it at the request of Jus Vit on the 6th of May, 1432. He begs you by means of this verse to take care of what came into being." Again, we know that it was finished in 1432. Hubert actually passed away in 1426, so that's the time Jan took over the contract to complete the work. So it was started sometime prior to 1426. Which again, it's 24 individual paintings, so it was a lot to do. The finished art piece today is called the Ghent altarpiece because it resides in Ghent, but it's also known as the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb. Now, that is the very center middle painting on the bottom. Altogether, the piece measures 12 feet tall and it is 15 feet wide when opened. Again, there's these 12 paintings on the interior. You can see all of them labeled there. And then whenever the wings, the sides of it are closed up, it does still stand 12 feet tall, but it's only 7.5 inches wide. The two bottom corner panels are the donor panels. So there's Jus Vit and Elizabeth Borlut. And then the center in the red is the Annunciation. So that is when the angel Gabriel appeared to the Virgin Mary. So after it was created in 1432, we're going to look at some of its more recent history, starting with Napoleon, as one does. So in the late 1700s, it was plundered by Napoleon. Belgian forces participated in Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, and it was returned in 1815 to Ghent. This part, there were some conflicting things. Some said that the Archdiocese of Ghent pawned the wings as a way to try to make some money, briefly. And then others say, it was a rogue priest that took and pawned them. But regardless, they were not collected within the time frame specified and were sold off to an English collector and later on sold to the King of Prussia. So those wings ended up in Berlin, Germany, or what's now Berlin, Germany. And then in 1822, the panels that remained in Ghent were damaged in a fire. These were restored, though. And then fast forward to World War One, the remainder of the panels were stolen from Ghent. The German forces wanted to complete the set, and so they were taken to Berlin. And then at the end of World War One, after treaties and everything, Germany returns all of the panels to Ghent that they had. So in 1920, it was whole again, back in Ghent, Belgium. In 1934, a thief actually steals the bottom left-hand panel. So again, these are panels. So a panel has a front and a back on two different panels, sandwiched together. So someone stole the bottom left-hand one, and they stole a painting of John the Baptist on one side and the Judges on the other. The painting of John the Baptist was returned, but the Judges is still missing today. And then in 1940, with the invasion of Germany once again looming on the horizon with World War II, they made the decision to send the altarpiece to the Vatican for safekeeping. While it was en route to Italy and in France, Italy came out as being an Axis power and siding with Germany. So they decided Belgium and France agreed that it would stay in the French museum where it was at, and we'll leave it there. No one will bother it. Fast forward to a Vichy government in France, and Hitler, who was a fan of this religious piece, it was taken and moved to a castle in Austria in 1942. And then in 1945, it was recovered from the Altus salt mines. So, sometime between 1942 and 1945, it was moved to the salt mines. Now, it was not the only painting at the salt mines. There were actually over 6,500 items recovered from there. So there was a task force within the Nazi Party that was dedicated to finding and appropriating cultural property, aka art. So the ERR went into conquered territories and places to take items for the regime. You could spend days talking about the cultural destruction wrought by the Nazi Party. But for the sake of this program, the salt mines in Altus, Austria, were extensive complex of salt mines and a large holding place for many of their looted items. So there were 6,500 paintings, plus statues, furniture, weapons, coins, library collections, all housed within these salt mines. As you might guess, it's not the best place to house really old special paintings. So the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb and the whole altarpiece was found here, 700 miles from its home in Ghent. Just like there was the ERR for the Nazi Party, there was a group of dedicated forces within the Allied Party to ensuring the survival and preservation of cultural items during the war. For the United States, the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives Section unit was established in 1943 and consisted of Army personnel and civilians with art and history backgrounds. They were on the front lines advising where monuments and areas of cultural importance were for pilots and other troops to try to preserve them and save them. They were known as the Monuments Men, but also women. And their goals shifted later on in the war as they started to enter reconquered and reclaimed areas and trying to get things back to where they belonged. Here we can see some monuments men inspecting the large center panel of the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb on the left image. And then the right image shows other panels that had been disassembled and were housed in the salt mines. So the surviving member of the Monuments Men and Women were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 2015 for their impact in preserving items of cultural significance. Altogether, they rescued over 5 million looted items, but there are, of course, still countless more missing and destroyed items out there. So the altarpiece of Ghent was returned to Ghent at the end of World War II and has undergone several restoration projects since then. The bottom left-hand corner is grayed out in this image to illustrate the still missing panel, the Judges, that was stolen in 1934. So if you are ever in Ghent, Austria, you can buy tickets. They have different time tickets to see the panels open, like in this image, or with them shut, where you see the ones on the exterior. Or if you're not getting to Austria anytime soon and you're a fan of virtual reality, you can buy virtual reality tickets to see them as well. Next, we are going to talk about a few works by Edvard Munch. So he's a Norwegian painter. His earlier, darker paintings secured his legacy, including one of the most recognizable pieces in art history, The Scream. The Scream was painted in 1893, and there's actually 4 versions of it that we'll talk about in a little bit. But the year before, in 1892, Munch wrote a poem which inspired the painting he made a year later. I was walking along the road with 2 friends when the sun went down. Suddenly the sky turned blood red, and I felt a breath of melancholy, an exhausting pain under my heart. I paused, leaning against the fence, tired to death. Above the blue-black fjord and city there was blood and tongues of fire. My friends went on, and I stood there trembling with anxiety, and I felt that a great infinite scream went through nature. So, poem in 1892, paintings in 1893, stolen in 1994. So 101 years later after he made The Scream, it was stolen from the Norwegian National Museum in Oslo, Norway. During the morning hours of February 11th, 1994, when much of the country was focused on the opening games of the Winter Olympics just up the road in Lillehammer, Norway. Two men climbed through a high window, and in under 50 seconds, they took the scream and left a note card saying, "Thanks for the poor security." The piece had been temporarily moved to a new location due to Olympic activities, and the thieves capitalized on that change. Because of the taunting note, authorities believe the culprit was someone who did it for the thrill and not necessarily was a lover of art. Ultimately, Paul Inger and three others were arrested for this crime. Inger was on their radar immediately because in 1988, you guessed it, he climbed through a window of another museum in town, the Munch Museum, and stole the painting Love and Pain, or the vampire, from that museum. So they recovered Vampire, or Love and Pain, hanging on his bedroom wall, and he was sentenced to a little bit of jail time, not enough from deterring him from doing it again. So in 1995, he was sentenced to 6.5 years for stealing the scream. Um, but he did maintain his relative innocence throughout it, saying that he only planned the heist and he didn't actually go in and steal it. And this undated image on the left shows Paul with the painting that he stole. Now, as I mentioned before, there's actually 4 versions of the scream that are out there. Um, 3 of them live in Norway, in Oslo, in museums. So the first one on the far left is the one that we just spoke about that Paul Inger stole. It is oil and tempera on pastel on cardboard at the National Museum. And then there's a pastel, another paint, and another pastel. So the one on the far right is the only one in a private collection, and it sold for $120 million in 2012. So the 2 in the middle are both housed at the Munch Museum. And that's where another one was stolen from. So on August 22nd, 2004, 2 armed robbers ran as fast as they could into the museum. Unfortunately, it was a little too fast and they ran into the sliding glass doors. People who remember that day didn't know what was happening, if it was a joke, it was some kind of prank. They had a glove was pulled over their head, but they weren't quite sure to make of it because they just ran into a door. And that's funny. But they ran into the museum. They looked through rooms. They went into the one room, pulled out a gun, told everyone to get to the floor. And then they look around the room, realize they're in the wrong room. This isn't where the paintings they wanted were. So they leave that room where everyone's lying on the floor to go find a different room. Altogether, there's it seems like a bad movie. But they ended up finding their targets and pulled these 2 large paintings off of the wall. They're so large that eyewitnesses said they actually dropped them several times. So they take these 2 paintings outside the building to this waiting car, and a passerby snagged this photo. Another eyewitness saw them a little further down the road rip the paintings from the frames as they switched cars, and authorities were embarrassed by another Munch heist. But they were able to connect it to a very unrelated heist 8 days later to help nab one of the culprits and everything started to unravel. In the meantime, this was fun to find. M&M's was offering a $2 million M&M reward for the safe return of the paintings. Since it was a criminal that ultimately gave it away and ousted it, they did not give him M&Ms, although he was a lover of chocolate, and so they gave a cash reward to the museum instead. So it was found out that it was actually a gang that had done a very large money heist, and so they had paid some people to go rob a museum to create a big to-do about that, to get some of the pressure off their back, which was what Paul Inger had been hired to do several years prior with the screen version at the other museum. And they were able to connect the crimes because it was a very unique gun that was used in both of them. And so that's how they were able to figure it out and put some pressure on people and get a confession. So both of these paintings were recovered with relatively little damage to them. But unfortunately, that does not always happen. So in 2012, there was a break in at the Kunsthal Museum in the Netherlands where 7 items were stolen. They would have been worth hundreds of millions of euros at a legitimate auction. Stolen items included this Matisse, which belongs on that blank spot on the wall. There are also 2 Monets and a Picasso in the group. And even more unfortunately, um, none of the items have been recovered, and several of them are known to have gone up in smoke, quite literally. So 4 Romanians were arrested for it, and that includes one of the actual thief's mothers. So whenever she knew authorities were coming in, she dug up the paintings from where she knew that they were buried near her home, and said that she burned several of them in her wood stove. Analysis of the ashes showed that there were dated nails in here that most likely came from the paintings, and none of those 7 pieces were ever recovered. This, unfortunately, is another story of mother not helping, but Stephen Breitweiser, his girlfriend, and ultimately his mother, uh, stole, handled, destroyed a lot of art. So these are just 5 of the pieces that are completely destroyed. The first 2, Peter Bruegel's The Younger's cheat, profiting from his master, and Anton Watteau's 2 Men, have no known surviving copies or prints. The last 3, which are also pictured below, the first 2 live on with copies, and the last one has prints from an engraving plate, but their originals are confirmed destroyed. So, who was this guy? Well, over a span of 7 years, from 1994 to 2001, he and to some extent his former partner girlfriend stole hundreds of items from at least 200 galleries and museums in Europe. Sometimes they revisited the same place to steal items again. They targeted smaller institutions that were away from tourist centers and had more lax security. He surrounded himself with his treasures and considered himself the wealthiest man in Europe. He was caught once in 1997. So, if you remember, from 1994 to 2001, so somewhere in the middle. But he received a light sentence and was able to continue working and stealing. It all did come to an end in 2001 when he was caught returning to a museum he had recently stolen from 2 days prior. He stole a 1584 bugle, and a security guard recognized him and alerted authorities. They arrested him and were able to connect him to other thefts, but because he was arrested in Switzerland and lived in France, they had to wait for an international search warrant for his home. So in the meantime, his mother destroyed, discarded, burned, cut, severely damaged lots of priceless artworks. So she does admit to destroying many of the paintings by cutting or carving them. She put shredded paintings in the garbage disposal. She made a pyre in the yard, burned paintings, threw things in the river, including over 100 artifacts and pieces that could not be burned or fit down the garbage disposal. So Mother Dearest tossed vases, vases, jewelry, pottery, and many more items into a nearby canal where they lived in France. So this image actually shows authorities draining the canal and to recover items. Neither mother nor son admitted to any crimes until items that had previously been tossed into the canal started washing ashore. So in 2005, they all received sentencings for their part in the stealing, handling, and or destruction. Breitweiser got the longest sentence and served 26 months in jail. In 2006, he also published an autobiographical book about his exploits, but he did not stay out of trouble. And in 2011, he was arrested when police found more than 30 stolen works in his home. And then he was received 3 years for that. And then in 2016, he was under surveillance again. And in 2019, arrested. Police found multiple items from multiple galleries. And he was put under house arrest and is required to wear an ankle monitor until 2031 when he is 60. At least 80 of the pieces they stole initially have never been recovered and are assumed destroyed. Unfortunately, several other items that have been taken. Oh, sorry, that's for the next slide. Hello. Next, we have Henry Spencer Moore. He didn't actually steal anything. He made things. He made monumental bronze sculptures and was known for some sketches. The bottom right-hand sculpture kind of looks like a funny couch, but it is 6 feet tall, 6 feet wide, and 10 feet long, and it weighs over 2 tons. And it was stolen in 2005. The sculpture was on the grounds of the Henry Moore Foundation when three men came in the evening armed with a crane in a large truck. It took several years to track things down, but police shared in 2009 that they were confirmed the statue was stolen, promptly cut up, and shipped abroad to be sold for scrap metal. Unfortunately, just because of the foundation garden and these items being outside, several others have been stolen over the years. Now let's hop, skip, jump across the pond to the good old US of A. And you can't talk about American art theft, pardon me, without mentioning Isabella Stewart Gardner. So this museum opened to the public in 1903 and contained items that Isabella Stewart Gardner and her husband purchased in their travels. One of her first acquisitions was the concert by Vermeer. After her husband's death, she wanted to share art, and she purchased land to create an art museum. She personally designed the galleries to her own personal aesthetic, and when she passed in 1924, she left her legacy in her will to ensure that the museum would continue. So fast forward to the early morning hours of Sunday, March 18th, 1990. If you think about that day, the night before was St. Patrick's Day in Boston. So late night revelers recall seeing two cops pull into the parking lot at the museum. The two security guards on duty, because there were only at least two security guards on duty, let those cops in. The fake cops subdued the guards and spent the next 81 minutes stealing 13 pieces. The thieves also took the video cassettes from the security cameras for the exterior of the building, but their movements were captured on the hard drive with the motion detecting equipment. So they were able to see where the thieves walked and how long they spent in different places. There have been no leads, and none of the pieces have been recovered to this day. Because Isabella's will decreed that the permanent collection should not change, visitors can now find these empty frames if they visit. For instance, this frame above the three chairs would have held The Storm on the Sea of Galilee by Rembrandt, the only ocean painting that he ever did. So all 13 pieces are shown here. If you ever come across any of them while you are antiquing, the FBI would love to hear from you. So the statute of limitations for these crimes has passed, and there are no leads to where these items valued at $500 million could be at this time. But there is a $10 million reward still offered. We're going to go out west for our next story. This painting on the left is Woman Ochre by William de Kooning, and it was painted in 1955. So this story starts in 1985 when this couple, shown in a police sketch, went into the University of Arizona Museum of Art early, just when they opened on Friday, November 29th, the day after Thanksgiving. The woman stayed in the main area chatting with the security guard there for a few minutes while the gentleman went upstairs and cut the painting Woman Ochre out of its frame. He had it stuffed up his jacket and his shirt and came downstairs, chatted with the woman, the security guard, and then they left. Whenever the security guard was walking around on his rounds, and museum staff found that the painting was missing. They were the only people who had been in the museum that morning, and the painting had been there prior to them opening. They used fake. They did not provide real names whenever they signed in the guest book. They paid with cash, and police only had these sketches and had no leads as to who stole them. So this is the painting Woman Ochre by William de Kooning, and it is behind the bedroom door of a couple who lived in New Mexico. So the alters were retired school teachers. They taught in New York and retired out to the Southwest. And whenever Rita Alter, the wife, died in 2017, their estate was sold off to a furniture and antique company, and this painting was among the things that were sold to them. So they had this painting in their store, and several people came in and said, whoa, 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 that looks like a real painting. You should get someone to check it out. And they finally did and found out, hey, we have this real William de Kooning, and it was actually stolen in 1985. So this couple was a retired set of school teachers that stole a painting. They were able to go back through their slides and everything and see that they were in the town for Thanksgiving with friends the day before. So they were in the place that the robbery happened, and it's believed that the alters stole it. Now there was a company, or a documentary was released in 2022 that took images and slides and pictures from their travels, and in that, an eagle-eyed watcher looked at stills of the film and performed a reverse search online, and found that these two paintings that were hanging up in their home were sold at auction in 2018. Aspen's was sold for $93,600 in Oklahoma Cheyenne for $52,650. He searched through hundreds of articles and newspaper clips to find a story in the Taos News detailing the theft of these two paintings in March of 1985. So just this year, in May of 2025, these paintings were finally returned to their home at the Harwood Museum of Art in Taos, New Mexico, and they made their first public appearance on June 6th of 2025. So this couple, they have family, friends, kids. No one knows why they did it, how they did it, what happened, but they stole at least three paintings. Okay. And to wrap up our talk, if you are on the lookout for stolen artwork, you can always check out Interpol's database of stolen works of art. This is international, so places from all over the world. You do have to request access, and they do require that member states of the UN contribute to this tool. But if you prefer to keep it more locally, you can check out the FBI's National Stolen Art File for artists, or in search for artists or titles of pieces. Law enforcement can upload items to this registry, but the FBI does warn that they don't always get told if something's been recovered. So if you come across something on there that you know has been recovered, do let them know. Thanks for watching. Feel free to watch any of our other recorded programs here on YouTube or visit us online at ptlibrary.org.